Good morning. This is Professor David Weiss speaking today I'm from New Jersey City University and our Connecting Bridges and Borders program. It's a continuation of a series of podcasts that we've been running now for 2 weeks, and we'll continue doing so moving forward. We advance support for business and continuation of connecting bridges on an international as well as local level. Our conversation today is focused on hospitality and the impact that the pandemic virus is having on our community, both here and abroad, and what the future holds. For our discussion on this, we have an esteemed colleague of mine, Martin Zsarnoczky, who is a member of the American-Hungarian Chamber of Commerce. He's also on the Education Committee. He's also an entrepreneur and a professor with a PhD in hospitality. With us as well is Andras Revesz. He is also on the Executive Leadership Committee for the American-Hungarian Chamber of Commerce. He is also, most importantly, on the front line as a travel agent with a very high-level international travel agency called ProTravel, serving the high-end luxury market. And he's going to give us some insight of what he's facing and what he's dealing with, as well as sort of some feedback from some of the conversations we have from the education side of how we can adjust to this new normal as we move forward in the future for hospitality in general. Martin, good morning. It's good to hear you. How are you?
Very good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Give us a little bit of background first about yourself. Obviously, given our time frame, we'll keep it sort of a little concise. But with that, I'm also going to ask a question besides your background, which is, how do you see and perceive hospitality moving in a direction that's very fluid today?
My name is Professor Zsarnoczky. Actually, I have over 25 years experience in the tourism industry and even in the hospitality industry. I have also my own businesses here in Europe, and also I teach at the university. So what's going on right now, it's quite shocking and it's quite new. Because when we are talking about tourism, we are talking about as an industry level, and what we see, we can say that the tourism today is not resilience to what's going on today. So, from my point of view, we are facing with the new challenges, very new approaches, and I'm looking forward to talking with you about that.
Thank you. And Andras, just to introduce yourself for a moment, how are you doing?
Thank you. Good morning. Andras Revesz. And again, introduction would be, I've been a travel advisor for the past 23 years. Started out with a small agency and moved on now with ProTravel International, and my services from the luxury to the corporate travel market. So yes, it is. It's basically, we are in a shock of what is happening. It was a very quick adjustment in our businesses from a busy period to a very quick wind down of coming to an instant halt. It's not something that I've experienced for this length, and but we've been through phases like this in the industry, lasting a few days or maybe longer, but we are surfing on a brand new territory now.
That's interesting. And Martin, I'd like to shift back then to the first question I have, which is what Andras raises, this word shock, and we'll call it a shock to the system. So how sort of can you walk us through, if you will, before this shock occurred and what hospitality was focused on a globalization level versus, and what those stakeholders look like that serve that globalization market, both the customer or the end user, as well as those that were the server or the provider of those experiences. And then we can move into a discussion perhaps about how you see where things possibly could be modified or altered given the cultural views or shifting views of what the end experience users may be seeking after we come out of this environment or situation.
It's a very long question, actually. Let's start with a little bit summary. The modern tourism, what we call today, it's based on the cheap fares, travel fares, airfares, cruising fares, everything what is based on the cheap travel cost. So, and also we have to add on this belongs to the mass tourism, okay? So when we are talking about mass tourism, also we can talk about luxury tourism, what we talk about a little bit later. Let's go back a little bit to the mass tourism. When we are talking about the mass tourism, every country, every state has international tourism and domestic tourism. What we see today, and where is the shock today, it's mostly the international or the global tourism, okay? For example, when we are talking about the domestic tourism today, still some service providers are still open and they are looking for new challenges in the domestic market. So let's go back a little bit to the test, to the international tourism. As I mentioned, that for the mass international tourism requires cheap airfares. So this is what we can forget about. Because what we see, I just checked the air radar before this interview, and I could see the air is completely empty all around the world. You can just check just a few airplanes in the air. So it's when we go back a little bit in time, I can compare the situation back like 9/11, okay, what was in the United States. So this is very, very similar to this situation. Also, when we are talking about the mass tourism requires safety, maximum safety. And of course, the safety doesn't concern only about the safety issues, the security issues. It concerns about hygiene as well. So what we see today, it's a lack of hygiene, lack of security, and the problem with the cheap air freight. So that's why what we are facing, that we have to rethink the transportation. We have to rethink about the tourism transportation in that and it wise. And also, what is a huge challenge now, we don't see the disposable income, because this disposable income will be missing in just a short term, maybe in 2, 3, or maybe 5 years, from the people who belong to the mass tourism, who were looking for the mass tourism services and products. So this is what I see now.
That's interesting, and I know that we're focused on the example of the illustration you're giving of the airfare. What would your paradigm, would it be different, or is it even more dramatic when it comes to the large cruise ship industry? As you may know, in the United States recently, as part of the $2 trillion stimulus package, which had some controversy around it, was that a large portion of that money is still being subsidized or pumped in, well, subsidized by the taxpayers, but then pumped into the system to try to save the cruise ship industry, as well as other industries that are surrounded around this concept of tourism, as well as transportation. What is your perspective on these large mega cruise ships? And are they going to be the dinosaurs that some people are talking about, and they're going to be converted into apartments or other imaginative or innovative concepts down the road?
Actually, let me start with the personal experience, because I was working for the Princess Cruises, what we see on the news, and I was working on the Dawn Princess which was the second largest ship of this fleet, what we see today. So this very massive ships. And also one additional personal experience that I've been also to a quarantine. I've been quarantined on as a waiter, as a restaurant staff in 1998, just outside Vancouver in BC, Canada, and we couldn't survive. We almost couldn't survive these 2 weeks what we spent on the ship, because as the end result, they were looking for the zero patient. It was actually a Canadian citizen, and the whole ship was locked for 2 weeks. So it was very, very shocking. It's like in a military. So it's like not normal. If you want to pay for a service, it's not a service, completely different. So back to your question, I think for the cruise industry, what we know today, it's over. I can't imagine that this large cruise ship, which they are moving through the Panama Canal, going up to Alaska, coming to the Caribbean, and after maybe they are moving to the Mediterranean, Europe, or somewhere else. I think this part of the business, it's just will shut down. I think maybe a local market, like a regional market, like the Caribbean market for the United States or Alaska, still remain. There is a chance. But I will not be surprised if in the next 5 or 6 years, some of these big cruise ship turn to like a social housing project. Because if you see, let me tell you one example. When I started to work on the ship, 1 week cruise costs almost $4,000 US. And just 2 years ago, I took a very nice cruise to the Caribbean, and it was $199. So the price is just
on the ship all year long if you wanted to.
Definitely, and I think if you just make a calculation, and because they do it, so maybe it's better for housing project instead of cruising. Maybe just the ship will stay in the port. Who knows?
That's interesting, and I think that goes to a conversation too that even goes deeper, which maybe some people may not even recognize, which is the cost of capital. So, if you're looking at these multi-mega ships that cost perhaps $1 billion to finance, capital looks for certainty. And I would presume that when we come out of this situation of this pandemic, the concern of the certainty, if you're forecasting 5 years out or 10 years out for a rate of return, will also play a factor in perhaps the decision-making process of whether or not the industry continues as we knew it before. Andras, you're hearing some of these comments made by Dr. Zsarnoczky as far as more of a macro level perspective, but you're on the front line, and I know you focus on the high-end luxury market, and so does ProTravel as an agency. What are you seeing right now in real time, and what are the challenges you're facing?
It's basically the uncertainty. We don't know when we can plan for, when big hotels are going to open up. Are they going to open up? Airlines that have shifted focus from carrying passengers are now carrying doctors and equipment, which is fantastic. But who is going to come out positive in the end? It's too early to say. It is a waiting game. It requires a lot of patience. I know many families are eager to reschedule their canceled vacation, their celebrations, their adventures, are eager to visit their clients and make the calls that they normally make. Of course, many people realize that Zoom is a fantastic tool, and it can alleviate some of the travel needs, but people like personal touch. People need that. We need that. So we are basically what we are looking for, and what we don't have the answer to is when we'll start loading the planes again, booking the hotels again, and when it's going to be safe, what are going to be the measures, are there going to be virus passports issued for people, and would that be able to allow travelers to get to places easier? Is that going to be an option at all?
That's interesting. And are you finding also right now a number of challenges with some of your clients with respect to the fact that they would have had to cancel their trips during this period of time? Legally, we call it force majeure, which is an act of God. And a lot of times these are exclusions, for those that may not know, in insurance policies as well as in commercial contracts and personal contracts, unless they've been carved out, and normally customarily they're not. Are you finding difficulties yet in the pipeline, or is it starting to just slowly percolate a little bit as to what the insurance companies are saying to you, which then you have to convey back to your clients with respect to the cancellation and the reimbursement under these insurance policies for travel during this pandemic period?
So it's changing. Of course, that is changing as well. Airlines, I'm going to start with, have been very helpful for the past decade, and have been able to accommodate the quick changes very, very fast. And that's how we were able to be proactive. During this pandemic, it was recognized very early that no one is returning monies, that it was not it was basically out of the question. Everyone have allowed free changes, and that was the extent. Some airlines have extended validity of airline credit from 12 to 15 months, but that's not a trend. Validity for now is, again, 1 year from date of issue, and almost unlimited changes are allowed. Even if you book for September, October, you will book under conditions that you will be able to make the changes for free. Applicable difference in fare will apply, but you will have the flexibility, and you will not be stressing about, am I going to be able to change a basic fare? Am I be able to make a change to any fares? That's not the issue. There is no penalties, and you are able to carry your value over. That's why preferred partners are good, because most likely preferred airlines will remain in business. Insurance policies have been very clear from the beginning that COVID-19 is not a reason for cancellation, so that's how they have covered themselves in the beginning. If you have a covered reason, health issue, yes, you're eligible for whatever benefit you're eligible for. And in the beginning of this program, the cancel for any reason insurance was still sold. Now, insurance companies almost across the board have done away with that. They are no longer offering cancel for any reason insurance, which would give you the option to cancel for any reason. You would not get 100%, you would get 75, 80. It would come with its restrictions as well, but they have depleted their resources and are no longer able to offer this option in order to remain in business. That came out within the past month. So that was not immediately addressed, but as it was the pandemic started, as it became a pandemic and the issue became serious, they have adapted to this change. But back to the airlines, they have not been offering refunds for even cancellations.
Well, that's interesting, Andras. I mean, and I'm going to ask Martin a question in a minute, but to leave on this particular matter, and we'll come back to you in a minute about hospitality when it comes to conferences that you're seeing canceled across the board. But, you know, it poses a lot of the remarks you're making poses a lot of what we'll call entanglements. In fact, we saw them even after 9/11. The market
just one second. Sure. That I want to note. I want to differentiate two things: cancellation and postponement. So there's cancellations, obviously, but what we prefer is postponement of a conference or a meeting.
And that's interesting, and I appreciate that clarification. One of the questions, Martin, of course, you know, which our listeners will need to pose or think about, and it's for another podcast, are the legal entanglements, which I was referring to, because even if they get credit or value for a future experience, whether it's with an air carrier or cruise ship or hotel, that doesn't mean that organization will be in business, as you said, and therefore that value will all go away because they will no longer receive the value because they'll wind up just like any other creditor with something that they have a claim against but may not ever get to be paid out. In fact, we saw that in a number of insolvencies with the airline industry in the United States through the 80s and the 90s, and with the big one, TWA, in its final and last days. So Martin, coming back to some of these sort of perspectives, we're focused on what Andras is sort of looking at. It certainly sounds like, you know, tourism will come back, of course. It's now going to be a question of who are the tourists, what are the policies that nation states or other areas that we go to around the world want to implement as well. So even though lots of tourists may want to go to a certain hub or a certain spot, it doesn't necessarily mean that that country is going to consider this. I'll use the Venice example, which was certainly a large concern to many Venetians over the last decade, given the environmental sensitivities that Venice as a city has had for centuries. How do you see the experience or the change in experience for those with the disposable income, whether it's in the United States, whether it's coming from China, whether it's coming or was coming from the middle class that was rising through the BRICS? How do you see this playing out, both for those that may be thinking about innovation or entrepreneurship, and also new ideas in terms of how we pivot? And take a choice of a menu of a few things I've asked. I know it's a long question as well, but I'll let you take a shot at it.
Let me finish my previous idea, because I forgot to tell you your question, what is the solution? Because there are different solutions. What to do now? How to react to this chaos? What's going on? And of course, we see many different solutions. For example, in Europe, you can watch the TV, and there is almost every second day a billion euros announcement about helping the industry, all the industry, not particularly the tourism. Even in the States, we just heard today or yesterday from the Fed that there is no limits. So they do whatever the market wants to have to save the market. Because when we are talking about the tourism business, we have to understand that there are only just two service providers who are endangered. One is the air flight companies, airlines, and the other service provider is a cruising ships, cruising lines. When we are talking about the accommodation providers, like the hotels, it's a different story. For example, in Europe, especially in Hungary, just from the mid of March, all the banks, they stop the mortgage. So you don't have to pay your loan back until the end of this year. So you have a moratorium, which is very, very important, almost for all hotel and restaurant bank loans. So this is a very good and very effective solution what we can do. Of course, it doesn't save the business because they have to pay the rent. Some of them, they have to pay the rent. But the biggest problem, what you mentioned, that there is no demand. So where is the demand? Because if the demand has no jobs, no payments, no salaries, so it's very hard to spend on tourism or just in the restaurants or in the pubs. So so back a little bit the future of the tourism. When we are talking about the tourism in 10 years from now, we have to know that the biggest transformation started with the digitalization 10 years ago. If there would be no digitalization process started, we would face much more bigger problem what we have now. Because you can see now we are talking about online, we do our podcast, so we survive, definitely. But from the education, from the tourism education side, let me tell you one real example. In our education system, in the tourism and in hospitality, the best jobs were the revenue managers in the last 2-3 years. So this was the top job in the tourism. If you study revenue management, you would be the top one with a very, very good salary. Guess who were the first one who been fired to this situation? Not the cooks, not the directors, not the cleaners, the revenue managers. So the market is changing, and the owners, the business owners, have to reconsider their goals. But also, just let me share one very, very important details in the tourism. When we are talking about the tourism development, we have to make a difference between the operators who are operating the business and the owners. Maybe they own the hotels, the real estates, the portfolios. So it's completely different story. Now, who are in shock, the operators, not the owners, because the owners, the big funds, they will be secure for sure. But the operators will have a hard time. And of course, there is a very good example. There was a rising star, Airbnb. Who knows? They will stay in the next 5 or 10 years. If you ask me, they will disappear from the market because there is no market at the moment for the Airbnb in that mass scale what we experienced in the last 5-10 years. Of course, when we are talking about the booking system, the booking.com, it's a different story because they are just doing reservation, and it's very good for everyone. So in my opinion, in the next 5-10 years, what we'll experience from the tourism, that there will be, instead of the globalization, there will be a localization. So I would focus definitely on the domestic market, and definitely I would focus on, for example, different, like very popular now the tourism regions or tourism destination, like you have in Long Island wine region is very popular for the New Yorkers, or the Lake Placid area. It's a wonderful place, so they will benefit from what's going on. But there is one very, very big question mark. Everyone who is working in the tourism, even in the professional or the member states or just workers, they are facing that now the tourism is very, very important part of the economic, of their own economic system. And I'm afraid, and if we are talking about the economic system or the GDP, the average is below or just close to 10%. So this is the average all over the world. But the question is, who is the biggest visitors? Who is the biggest tourist sender all around the world? It's China. Mm-hmm. So the big question mark, what's going on with China? Because, you know, this is, I just make it up this like a further question. So what we will do with China?
It's interesting you asked that question because I think it's a complicated question, both in terms of what we will do with China going inbound for tourism, as well as China and its middle class going outbound for tourism. And that maybe brings, you know, the last question I have for you, Martin, and then we'll open up for some questions and answers for a few moments to our audience that's live today with us. And that is, how do you think the societal social norms and customs, which will possibly change through this, and most likely will change from this transnational experience in the coronavirus epidemic that we're facing today, through what we'll see in measured policies that may vary depending on nation states, regions, or regional pacts, like, for example, the European Union versus nation states within the European Union, and a divergence on how they feel about, you know, having 20,000 people come to a conference, which would have been normal course of business, like it would have been in Las Vegas. It would have happened right now in, for example, Split, Croatia in the summer.
It's a very good question. Actually, I think the level of the tourism will be segmented and fragmented. What do I mean about that? That in the last 2-3 years, when you just open a tourism journal, there was almost every second article with the definition of over-tourism. So that was what we are facing. The tourism, the global tourism, was facing with the tourism, with the over-tourism. And if we look behind the numbers, we could see that this tourist flow is completely different what used to be. 20 years ago, of course, when you were a tourism supplier, service provider here in Europe, in that case, you just expected many American tourists because there was a middle class. Okay, let's call middle class, and with the disposable money, disposable income, and time. And now what we see on the streets, in the hotels, and almost in the big tourism hubs, it's a Chinese tourism. So it's a lot of Chinese and lots of Asians. They are coming to Europe, and especially also to the United States, because their middle classes are rising. So there are two ways. One way is just the China will just focus on their domestic tourism. We saw we just watched in the news that just maybe during 3 days they built one hospital for 5,000 people. So it's not a problem to build the whole Europe for them. I think in a short term. But in other way, what is my expectation that there will be instead of the city tourism, the London, the Paris, the Barcelona tourism will change. And I think there will be a new artificial tourism hubs, okay? Let me compare this to you. Let me explain this to you. For example, if you travel to Orlando, it's very interesting example, because in Orlando, there are only just 5 attractions, no more than 5. And still with these 5 attractions, Orlando can estimate over 80 million tourist visitors per year. Compared to Paris, Paris has also almost 90 million, but in Paris there are maybe 10,000 or even more tourism attractions. So definitely, in my opinion, the Orlando's example, it's better. This is gonna be the future instead of the over-tourism city hubs.
Interesting. And, you know, it also will leave it here for questions and answers, but it raises the question of that overcapacity of tourism that we were facing in other countries, including an interview that Connecting Bridges and Borders did last week from Iceland about the environmental contributions towards over-tourism. And we'll certainly save that for another dialogue and another podcast that we'll be doing on the economic and environmental impact of tourism. I'd like to now open it up to some questions for our esteemed guests that took their time today. And I'm already seeing some email chat, so feel free to ask a question. And our producer, Michael Arbit, who's a doctoral fellow at the IDR, who's been working behind the scenes and helping us produce our shows with our staff from the Institute for Dispute Resolution and our programs, is doing a fantastic job. I've got 4 of them, actually. So the first question was from Tomas Barat, who is the head of the American-Hungarian Chamber of Commerce and has joined us today. And his question is to Andras. You mentioned that the COVID-19 is not the reason for cancellation. I think he's referring to the policy discussion. I've seen today's statistic of the FlightAware, which I guess is showing different flights in the air. And total cancellations today was 12,618 air routes. Wow. So I guess his question is, what is the reason if it's not for COVID-19?
So to clarify that what I was talking about with insurance companies, that they have been clear in their explanation of benefits that a cancellation of a trip due to the virus, and that was actually before it became a pandemic, was not a covered reason. So even if you had purchased insurance for your trip and the pandemic had happened, you did not have that option to say, I'm afraid to go on this trip. I don't know what happens. I don't know what hygienes I'm going to be meeting on the plane and so on. I would like to cancel. The insurance companies were clear about that you don't have the right to cancel for this reason. But then continuing, airlines and hotels have adapted with flexible change policies. So
that's interesting. That's interesting. And again, I think a lot of this stuff is still new and fresh for all of us, including you, Andras, in terms of how you're mediating, if you will, navigating these problems. Another question comes from Diana Concepcion, who I believe is a student in our global business class at NJCU. Her question is concerning tourism. My friend from Japan told me that at the beginning, Tokyo's officials were trying to conceal the number of people sick with the coronavirus in order to save the Olympics from being postponed there. Since my friend lives in Tokyo, he knows how fast the virus is actually spreading, and now Japan had to unofficially postpone the games. How bad do you think this decision will hurt Japanese tourism perspectives and its economy as a whole? Great question. Martin, why don't you take a stab at this one?
This is a very, very good question and point on the tourism future, because this question it says that we have to choose between the safety or the sustainability, economic sustainability. Because my question is that, do we need to hold the Olympic Games in every 4 years in different countries? Because in my opinion, maybe this is gonna be the future. There will be one development. It's a universal place for all the Olympic Games in any state. I mean, maybe we don't need to have as many states had the Olympic Games like used to be. So this will change maybe in the future if we go to the safety instead of the economic sustainability. So this is the question now, what Diana pointed on, which is the most important for the industry, for the tourism industry, safety or sustainable economy?
Yeah, and that's interesting, and that's a great viewpoint and response to her question. You know, there was also, you know, to just leave it there, and there's another question that's come up on the Olympics and these massive sort of infrastructure projects. There's a lot of controversy over the last several years anyway, both about the Winter and Summer Olympics, where cities who win the bids, I think it began with Brazil during the Brazilian, the Rio Olympics. And the issue there was that, you know, for what it costs to build the infrastructure once you win the bid versus what you actually get out of it in terms of sustainable economic tax dollars to the state and to its to those who are the operators and users on the ground floor post the Olympics, it's almost a reverse paradigm. It was creating a negative impact to begin with. And it really was the prestige, if you will, of hosting the games more than the concept that you'll actually generate money as a nation state by winning the bid. Yeah.
Yeah, but in Japan there is also another problem, because what is the main problem what they are facing, that this Olympic Park was held, all the Olympians and all the staff, it's already sold. I mean, it's already sold to private persons. So this is a kind of real estate problem in Tokyo, what's going on, instead of holding the Olympic Games. And
we're gonna do one more question. It is to Martin from Tomasz Barat, and his question, Martin, was really maybe an amplification of something you had talked about before, which is why is currently, maybe it's a was at this point, the revenue manager the best job in the hospitality industry? Maybe you can explain a little further what you meant by that. And I'll add on, what do you think the best job, or when we're looking at hospitality education, which NJCU has a wonderful and great hospitality education department, you know, what should those that are thinking about degrees, certifications, or even those in the industry now be considering to be maybe the more opportunistic jobs to be in the future?
Yeah, the question is very good, and the question is, my answer is very easy, because they have some incentives from the profits or from the turnover. So that's why it's an additional salary. For example, if they reached, there are just a few stops. For example, if you, it's like a very simple sales job. Let's call it sales job. If you sell this very good revenues, if you get it 1 million, 2 million, 3 millions per month, you will receive extra incentives and extra benefits. And regarding to your question, how the tourism jobs will change, I had a very good article from the Boston University Review, and this is about the tourism in the next 15-20 years. So what we see, the automatic booking, the personal service, and the customized service will be the top demand in the industry. So, and the question is could the personalized service digitalize or not? It's a good question.
It's a great question.
You can do it. Of course, you can do it with the artificial intelligence, because but this is this is a different. I think this is a different topic or different.
No, and it's a great topic. It's sort of through this interview podcast. There are a number of different topics actually that have come out of it, and this recent one of AI, I think, is absolutely another great illustration of another discussion. My last question is for Andras. Andras, right now, obviously, as human beings, we always have a great innate, not only adaptability to our environment, it's why we have been able to survive on this planet as long as we have, but we also have internal spirit and hope and optimism. At least here, I can speak to that to us in the United States. And I believe around the world, human beings in general try to be as optimistic as they can, even with their challenges. What are you finding are some of the advice that is being asked of you when it comes to, okay, I'm assuming things kind of settle down, or there's even an interperiod between this pandemic wave, and maybe during the latter part of the summer, there may be an opportunity to do some short, even domestic travel. When some of your clients are talking about what are you advising them where not to go right now, perhaps, or think maybe the better answer is not where not to go, perhaps where should they be thinking about going in order to have an experience and limit their exposure or risk to the uncertainty of the environment that we're living in currently?
Well, I would definitely say, or would want to clarify, are we over with the pandemic? Is it behind us? Or are we all in the clear and everything is...
Yeah, let's assume that we're not in the clear, as the scientists are saying, for probably at least a year, but there may be periods of adjustment that allow us to get out of our homes at some point, especially as rapid testing, and we know who has it and where the clusters are. And I'm sure over time, over the next couple months, we'll be very innovative in terms of how we create that safe zone environments that will enable people to begin traveling, it may be limitedly, but to do things, whether it's for business or for pleasure. So assuming that's the case, what would you be sort of advising them, at least inside maybe the United States, not necessarily getting on a plane and flying to Paris yet?
Well, it would be the local, it would be supporting the local market, and where you would be able to travel to with the least exposure to anything, where you would be able to guarantee the most hygiene. But on a bigger scale, in our industry, we've done extremely well with supporting the hard hit areas, past hurricanes, or I would love to support Italy, Spain, and the areas that have been very badly hit. But again, it may be too early to be venturing into territories like this. I know there's going to be people that will not want to get on an airplane. Private companies are going to do, or have been doing, wonderful. But it's a magic ball question. It's what you can do is support your local area. If you are going to be traveling with an airline, we'll see who's going to be around, who's going
to. It's interesting. I almost envision, Andras, from your experience, that something we'd see in the movies of generations past, where the middle class or the rising middle class American family would get in their car. In fact, I was a product of that myself as a young child, and we'd drive to places that were within driving distance of, for example, the state of New Jersey. And that included going as far as Maine to as far as south as Florida, or going out west. So, there are things that I guess experiences will adapt to, which will become more localized, but maybe not these mass, enormous experiences like a Las Vegas sort of experience that we've been having, which would be sad to see it go. But if we had to have an intermediary period of time in order to bring that back at some point in some fashion, it seems to be that there are going to be lots of possibilities that you, of course, as an expert in your field, providing experiences are going to show us the pathway. So first of all, I want to thank both Dr. Zieminski and Andras Revesz for their time today and giving us a little insight into both the macro level of hospitality and its impact that has been created due to the pandemic. A lot of interesting discussions were had both in terms of insight provided as well as frontline experience and some of the challenges I think we're hearing that may start to percolate from the tourism space itself and the end users, as well as the operators and what their challenges long-term will be in terms of those that will continue or adapt or not survive. And we certainly are able to get from this interview a number of different other variable subject matters that are tied to hospitality but cross over into many other disciplines, so and sectors of business. So over time, our podcast through Bridges and Borders will continue with other great guests, and we thank our guests today for their time. Gentlemen, and for all those that took their time to be on today, stay healthy, well, and as always, our prayers go out to you, your friends and loved ones, and may we all get through this together. Take care.
Thank you.